Hi everyone, welcome to your brand management class. I'm Professor Lokpez-Cobo, and this is your video number 1 for your first class branding concepts. So for this first class, we're going to be learning products and brands with key concepts, brands versus product differences, 5 levels of meaning for a product, product classification, and perceived product risks. We are also going to be discussing brand equity and key sources of brand equity. So there are some very basic questions that we need to ask ourselves before we start getting into the key concepts. So are products and brands the same? What is a product and what is a brand? They seem like very basic questions, but sometimes clarification is needed. So a product is anything we can offer to a market for attention, acquisition, use, or consumption that might satisfy a need and want. A brand, on the other hand, is a name, term, sign, symbol, or design, or a combination of them, intended to identify the goods and services of one group of sellers and to differentiate them from those of the competition. And those are the definitions by the American Marketing Association. It is important to note that for the purpose of the discussion of this specific class, we are going to be grouping products and services under the product category. So with that in mind, let's think on some examples of products. We're thinking on physical goods, services, people, organizations, geographic locations, ideas, sports, arts, and entertainment. These are some examples. So when we think, for example, on the city of Miami, when we think on destinations, these are products examples, right? People are products examples as well. Of course, the examples that you're seeing on the screen are examples of products that have been branded. So let's start thinking about the main differences between brands and products. A brand is more than a product. It can have dimensions that differentiate it from other products to satisfy the same need. And these needs may be rational and tangible, or they might be intangible and emotional. So with that in mind, we can get into a discussion of what are the levels of meaning for a product. Every time that I go through this example, I like to use water as a key product to kind of like show the different levels of meaning that we need when we are creating and marketing a product, right? So we start with the very core benefit. And the core benefit is the fundamental need satisfied by the product or service. So here we're talking that, the core benefit of water will be what? Will be quenching thirst, right? Then we go to the generic level. The generic level is a basic version of the product containing only attributes or characteristics that are absolutely necessary for it to function with no distinguishing features. So here we're talking that in that bottle of water, what we need to have there is actual water, right? And when we go to the expected benefit, these are the attributes that buyers are normally expecting and agreeing to when they purchase a product. So an example here, if they're purchasing water, maybe it can be that, they want the water to be clean water, right? They don't want to get sick when drinking your water. Then we go to the augmented benefits. And the augmented benefits, these are additional product attributes, benefits, or related services that distinguish the product from competitors. So here, many people tell me, well, water is water, right? But it's not true. How many water brands are out there? And some people are really willing to pay more for some brands than the other. So if we start thinking on the augmented benefits, maybe you can say that your water has been enhanced with electrolytes, with minerals, that your water is a flavored water, and so on, right? And then we go to the potential level, and the potential level are all the augmentations and transformations that a product might ultimately undergo. So here we're talking that, it's not only that you're offering flavored water, but also one of the transformations that you can think for your water, of the augmentations that come with associated cues, can be that your water is benefiting communities that do not have access to water, for example. So for every water bottle that people are buying from you, then you are donating X amount of dollars or cents or to these communities that are in need of clean water, for example. And you can continue to go on and on and on. So as you can see here, you go from the very rational core benefit and you start to move on to more emotional, intangible benefits. In many markets, competition takes place at the product augmentation level. The US is a case of a market where competition takes place at a product augmentation level. Why? Here in the US, pretty much consumers have many different choices. So you have to make sure that you differentiate yourselves with rational and then also with emotional attributes that connect, right? So then we go to product innovation, and product innovation is a key differentiator. When we're thinking about the companies that are top of mind, companies that are constantly growing, we're thinking on companies that are innovating. So what do you think are some of those companies? Well, we know them: Apple, Google, Amazon, Microsoft, Samsung, Tesla, and so on, right? Then the next step is to start thinking a little bit on how can we classify products. The first one is search goods. Search goods are pretty much consumers can evaluate the products very easily just by inspecting the product. Then we go to experience goods. And experience goods, maybe it's a little bit harder to evaluate the product just by a general inspection, and you actually have to try and experience the product. For example, automobile tires. Maybe not everyone is as familiar to what are the different features that an automobile tire should have. Many times product trial is needed, and in this case you actually have to buy the tires and experience it to actually assess the product attributes. Then we go to credence goods, and these are the ones that it's just very hard for consumers to assess what are the product attributes. So for example, medical services. I mean, unless you have experience in the medical field or a lot of experience with a specific illness, sometimes it's very hard to know if the service that you're being provided by a physician is actually meeting your expectations, or how is it compared with the services provided by another physician. So brands are important signals of quality for experience and credence goods, since consumers have difficulties assessing and interpreting product attributes and benefits. So when we're talking about experience good and credence goods, it is important to do a lot of branding work behind them. So let's start thinking a little bit about product risks. And product risks, this is something that we're always assessing in the back of our mind, right? And many times we're not even aware of it. So we have the functional risks. And this is pretty much that the product does not perform up to expectations. So you don't want to buy something that doesn't work, period, right? Then the physical risk. The product poses a threat to the physical well-being or health of the consumer or others. Well, I mean, you don't want to get sick, for example, when you're consuming a specific product. Financial, the product is not worth the price paid. You don't want to find out that you overpaid, that maybe the product is less expensive elsewhere, or the competitor's product is less expensive and is as good. Social, the product results in embarrassment from others. I mean, you don't want to buy maybe a malfunctioning product that is going to embarrass you, right? In front of your social groups. Psychological, the product affects the mental well-being of the users. So an example could be maybe smartphones. If we're constantly hooked to smartphones, if we're constantly hooked to technology, I mean, there is a lot of research out there that is coming up with, what are the different risks, psychological risks that are associated with excessive use of technology. And then time. The failure of the product results in an opportunity cost of finding another product, right? So you don't want to find out that you spend all this time trying to buy a product or find a product, doing your research, and then realize that it doesn't work, and then Who's going to give you back your time, right? You can return the product, but what about your time? So time is money, as we know. So brand matter to consumers and to firms, to both, and serving different purposes. When we're talking about consumers, I mean, it really, as consumers, they help us to identify the source of a product, to assign responsibility to the product maker or to the companies, to reduce the risk, all those risks that we just talked about when we're assessing the different types of products. The promise bond or pact with the maker of a product. So, you already trust the brand and you almost feel that you have a pact with the brand, right? And the symbolic device, or they also signal quality. So those are all different reasons why brands really matter to consumers. But what about to firms? To firms, I mean, it's a way to actually help identify that product versus the competition. It's a means of legally protecting, right? Your unique features, your property, your intellectual property, a signal of quality level, right? That will satisfy consumers. And then it will endow products with unique associations, all those cues that immediately take people to the brand, and the competitive advantages as well as sources of financial returns. So as we're seeing, our whole branding work that we're doing as marketers is not only relevant for consumers, but as well as for firms. Brands in general are very powerful. They ignite feelings. They have personalities. They cultivate relationships. And we're going to be talking about this through the whole course. Products are created in the factory, but brands are created in the mind of the consumer. So it goes back to that initial quote that it's all about building brand equity and positioning yourself in the minds of your consumers. So when we're talking about branding, we can see that there are a lot of different brand assets that consumers are familiar with, that consumers have visibility. For example, the logo, brand name, slogan, and there are many others that we're going to cover throughout this course. But then there are some that maybe they're not as aware, but that they play a key role when we are talking about branding and brand equity. For example, missions and goals of the company, strategies, employees, the positioning, the values, the culture, the identity, and so on. The list is very long. So this is very important to have in mind when we are building solid branding strategies. And with this, we go to the key concept, of this class, which is really brand equity. What is brand equity? It is the differential effect that knowing the brand name has on consumers' response to the product or its marketing. It is a measure of the brand's ability to capture consumer preference and loyalty. So again, it's how we are positioning ourselves in the mind of our consumers. And what we have when we do it is customer-based brand equity. That occurs when the consumer has a high level of awareness and familiarity with the brand and holds strong, favorable, and unique brand associations in memory. What is important to know here is that customer-based brand equity can be positive, but it can also be negative. It's positive when consumers react more favorably to your brand than to a generic brand. And of course, it's negative when the opposite occurs. So brand equity, again, a key concept for all marketers. So there are different sources of brand equity. We have brand awareness and brand image. Within brand awareness, we have that it consists of brand recognition and brand recall performance. Brand recognition, it's pretty much the consumer's ability to recognize a brand when they are given the name of the brand as a cue. Brand recall, which is different, is the consumer's ability to retrieve the brand from memory when they are given a specific cue, such as the product category or the needs fulfilled by the category, and so on. So it's important to note that brand awareness is created either through repeated brand exposure, that we already mentioned that's brand recognition, right? Or from the associations, right? From forging strong associations, and that's actually brand recall. After sufficient brand awareness has been created, then marketers go and emphasize the next step. So brand image is linked strong, favorable, and unique associations to the brand in memory. So pretty much, that's the perception that our consumers have of our brands. And it comes from different types of associations. And the types of brand associations can be either brand attributes or benefits, as we have been discussing throughout the class. So, brand attributes, we're talking about descriptive features that characterize a product or service. So that's very tangible, many times very rational. And then we're talking about brand benefits. This is more the personal value and meaning that consumers attach to a product or service, right? So it is important to understand that within the different types of brand associations, we have strengths, favorability, and uniqueness. So the strengths of brand associations pretty much is based on personal relevance and the consistency in which consumers are exposed to the brand. Favorability, it's a little bit more about convincing consumers that the brand has relevant attributes, right, that benefit them, that satisfy their own needs. And then the uniqueness of brand association, there we go again to that product innovation concept that we discussed before. It's a little bit more of, what is your unique selling proposition? How are you differentiating from the rest? So with this concept, we're wrapping up the first part of class number 1, and I now invite you to watch the second video for this first class.